Good evening. Welcome to People's University Around the World in Literature and Language. And this is our final class, although next week in this time slot, we will have our Geography B, where you'll be able to win prizes from gift certificates from local businesses, restaurants, etc. Where you'll be able to win prizes from gift certificates from and now I've disappeared. Here I am.
Good.
At the Geography B on August 6th with Dr. Javersack. Tonight, we are very happy to conclude with two excellent professors. One I went to high school with. We both learned English from Lou Volpe, who you saw last week. And I believe I can speak for Kim when I say he influenced both of us. And I hope he's watching tonight and gets embarrassed by that. But like I said, Kim and I were classmates at Wheeling Central Catholic High School way back in like the Civil War days or something like that.
Indeed.
And I'm going to introduce both Kim and her co-presenter, KV White. Kim has a PhD and is a professor and instructional designer at Northern Virginia Community College. She's a lifelong educator and has a bachelor's degree in English from St. Vincent College in Latrobe. You can see her Steeler gnome and bobblehead behind her. She also has a master's degree in English from Salisbury University in Maryland. She has a second master's degree in educational technology from San Diego State University and recently earned her PhD, as I mentioned, in community college leadership from Old Dominion. KV White is originally from Venezuela, which is why she's helping us with Spanish language tonight. She is Associate Dean at Northern Virginia Community College. She earned her BA at Marymount University, her English MA at the Pennsylvania State University, and she was an intern at the National Museum of American History, also known as the Smithsonian. And she is currently working on her PhD at George Mason University. Here are Kim Grewe. We'll start with Kim, right?
Yeah.
And KV White. Here we go.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sean, for that very nice introduction and listing all my degrees. I am a lifelong learner and a lifelong educator, and that is a big part of my personality. And let me just say, I am absolutely, you can see I'm bursting at the seams. I'm thrilled and honored to be here. The pandemic has been something that's really put a lot of stress and been really difficult for us in so many ways. But one way that it's brought us together is through this wonderful program that Sean's coordinated. And I've just enjoyed being part of it all summer long. And I'm just really honored to be able to speak at the last one here. And I also want to say a word about KV before I move on, because I'm just very grateful that she agreed to do this to help, because she's going to bring just a wonderful, authentic experience and perspective that I don't really have. But I'm really happy to talk about today's book. And let's see, let's share that. Okay. I'm trying to share that. Let's see. And I think we've done it. All right. So yes, Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And hey, Janet Bonenberger, Rin, seeing you there from the Pacific North, and Dr. Lynn Wilgenen, hello. So today we're going to talk about Love in the Time of Cholera, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Oh, I think we lost the screen there. Sorry about that, y'all. Probably user error. Don't worry about that. So a little bit about myself. I am a Maroon Knight. And do you all want to guess? It was Civil War time, Sean said, but actually it was not quite that long ago. But we are classmates from, guess the year. Anyone? Yes, 1984. I'm a lifelong educator, as Sean said, and you can see there, there's me at ODU graduation, and even in California here where I live, we've got the Steeler regalia going strong. So there's a mask some Steeler fan friends made for me here in California. So I've been a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher since I was in 7th grade, and I've been a teacher my whole life in one capacity or another. I've been was an English teacher, and I still work with English faculty to design online courses. So I'm just thrilled to be here to talk today because I've been in a lot of book clubs. I have friends on Facebook who might be watching today who were in those book clubs, and I've done nothing but talk about books and read books my whole life. The last thing I want to point out, that picture in the bottom right, those are my reading journals. I started to keep track of the books I read in 1993, and not only a list, but just sort of my notes and my thoughts about them. And sometimes I revisit them and I go back and see what I wrote before. And there's even a journal there that one of my friends from high school, who's also, I think, here today, gave me that green journal there where I started it in 1993. So yeah, 84, Janet, that's right. All right. So let's move on and talk about the book. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on the book. I'm going to talk a little bit about the author and give a little background about the author. And then we're just going to do sort of a formalistic review, looking at the different forms in the book, looking at those common things that we talk about when we talk about books. So we'll look at the setting, characters, plot, style, and we'll talk about themes. Now, as I am talking to you today, anytime you want to chime in, please feel free. I know this format doesn't allow the same kind of interaction maybe that some formats do, but there is a chat there, whether you're watching in Facebook Live or on YouTube. And I see some people are already using it because some of those do, come across the screen, as you'll see. If you go ahead and put those chats, I think I can follow those some and answer those questions, some as they come in. And then when I ask questions, I sincerely will wait a little bit and see if anybody wants to type in some answers. So I see Risa in there. Hello, Risa. And so with that, we're going to move along. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez was born in Aracataca. I probably didn't say that well, Colombia. Thank goodness KV is here, in 1927, and he died in 2014 in Mexico City. He did spend some time traveling in the South and ended up in Mexico City and ended up living about his last 30 years there. He did win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1982, and the committee said, quote, for his novels and short stories in which the fantastic and the realistic are combined in a richly composed world of imagination, reflecting a continent's life and conflicts. And so it's quite an honor, and he's much beloved. He's known as Gabo, and he really is quite a figure. This is a video that's only about 2.5 minutes long. And I'm going to show it, and Sean will let me know if there are any technical difficulties or the sound is not coming through. This is after he died. This was a video that came out. It's very short, but it provides really a nice overview and a feel. You get some images of him and things like that. And I thought it'd be nice to see. It's very short.
By the time Gabriel Garcia Marquez won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1982, he was already an internationally acclaimed writer. The Colombian author's works had already been published in multiple languages. Garcia Marquez, affectionately known as Gabo, would later tell adoring audiences that he always wanted to be a writer.
I knew that I was going to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer. I had the will, the disposition, the energy, the ability to be a writer. I was always writing. I never thought about being something else, but I never knew that I could make a living with this.
His novel 100 Years of Solitude, which was published in 1967, made him a literary star. It sold more than 30 million copies throughout the world during the writer's lifetime. It put a spotlight on the Latin American genre known as magical realism, in which reality and fiction clash, making it difficult for the reader to tell where one ends and the other begins. Garcia Marquez's association was highly valued by world leaders from Yasser Arafat to Mikhail Gorbachev, whom Gabo met during the latter years of the Cold War. He had a special bond with Cuba's Fidel Castro and the Cuban people, often visiting the island and appearing in public with this communist leader. Also a screenwriter, in 1986, he founded an international film school in Cuba with Castro's full support.
It happened that with film, I realized that making a movie was infinitely more difficult than I thought.
He continued to write and lecture in Mexico, where he lived for more than 3 decades. You shouldn't expect anything from the 21st century, he once told a group of young admirers. It is the 21st century which is expecting it all from you. With his health failing, he slowed down during the mid-2000s, but still attended events like the International Book Fair in Guadalajara in 2008. On March 6, 2014, Garcia Marquez walked out of his house to briefly meet with fans, wishing him a happy 87th birthday. He was all smiles and seemed in good spirits, but made no comments. Garcia Marquez's legacy is perhaps best captured by the Nobel Prize Committee, writing about the author in 1982, a text that talks about the writer as a creator and one of the most accomplished storytellers ever. With his stories, Gabriel Garcia Marquez has created a world of his own, which is a microcosmos, the committee said. In its tumultuous, bewildering, yet graphically convincing authenticity, it reflects a continent in its human riches and poverty. Rafael Romo, CNN, Atlanta.
So, indeed, I thought that was a nice tribute after he died. And his grandparents influenced him. He lived with them for the first 8 years of his life. His parents had some financial difficulties, and they were a big influence. His grandfather was a liberal colonel and from the military, and his grandmother told him these stories, and there was a lot of superstition and ghosts and portents and just all of this stuff that was kind of she believed in, and she would tell these fantastical stories, but with a totally straight face. And he said he had to learn. Once as a writer, he learned to believe in that way, and then to tell it that way. Like her face was like a brick, he said. That's when he sort of got the hang of the magical realism that we're going to talk about a little bit later in today's show. So just a very fascinating person and writer. Setting of the book, the city of the Viceroys, a South American coastal city between the years of 1875 and 1925. These are a couple of the places in the book. The place where Fermina is originally from, San Juan de la Ciénaga, and then the Park of the Evangels, where Fermina's father buys that great place he restores, where that courtyard is. That becomes a really important place where Florentino plays the violin there and whatnot. But the city's never exactly named. And so, but we are to understand it represents a modern day Cartagena, which we'll look at in a moment. And when we also talk about when, setting is also when. This is the turn of the century, and in particular, we're talking about into the 19th century, into the 20th century. And this term fin de siècle refers to that turn of the century, but it's met with there's a pervading sense of instability and unease, and it's an age is coming to an end and a new one is beginning, but we don't necessarily know if these new changes are going to be good. And even though that's a 19th to 20th century thing, I think even now in 2020 we understand that feeling. And actually, I was gonna ask you a little bit about those technologies. So there are a lot of old colonial structures still in the city, with the cobblestone streets and some brick streets and that sort of thing. But then there's some new things happening in the city as well. And so there's some contradictions in there in the city, and I find that to be interesting. So as I was saying, modern day Cartagena. So this small map is the highlight of Colombia, the country, and then here's a blow up of Cartagena, just to get an idea, you know, and in my imagination, it really did look like this, you know, in my head. I was going on what maybe I had seen in movies or read in books before, except for the modern pool on the left there. I want you to know that the images either come from Wikimedia Commons or from a place that doesn't require attribution. But if a person's name was there, I did attribute. So I just want you to know that Roberto Nixon gave us that nice photo there. The thing on the right there took straight from Wikipedia, but just some of the sites of Cartagena. And you can see that from the descriptions in the book that some of these shots here reflect. And just for fun, that church there, I did watch the movie. I don't know if any of y'all did, and we're going to hear from you all. But I did watch the movie at the beginning of this week, and this is the church from the movie, and that's in Cartagena. And then this is the Plaza de Bolivar, and that's actually where they shot a lot of the scenes for the Arcade of the Scribes. You know, that kind of shady place. Let's see. Yeah, so let's move on there. So in the novel, Marquez describes a time when the great old families had sunk into their ruined palaces in silence. Along the rough cobbled streets that had served so well in surprise attacks and buccaneer landings, weeds hung from the balconies and open cracks in the whitewashed walls of even the best cut mansions. And the only signs of life at 2 o'clock in the afternoon were languid piano exercises played in the dim light of the siesta. And that's actually, you know, that image down in the lower left there, that in the slide, that is a revitalized version of that, I think. And so these are just some, you know, those vibrant markets. There's some scenes in the marketplace where Fermina does her shopping and Florentino's many times he's stalking her. And you could just really, they get in trouble when they go get those pictures taken, she and her cousin, you know, and they get kind of stuck there. It's kind of a wild place, and I thought it was an important part of the setting and really helps set the scene. So I've been talking a bit, and I thought it was interesting being the turn of the century and Urbino being sort of a modern type of man and a doctor who was so involved in some of the advances in town and whatnot. So what are some of the technologies in the story? And if we think of those technologies as like part of the setting, you know, what purpose do they serve? Do they contribute to some other aspect of the book? So I'll wait a little bit while you answer that question. I'll play a little background music. Good, Janet. I'm seeing some things come in. There's one answer. I'm waiting for some more. Well, I'll take the background music off a little bit and speak to Janet. I gotta get back to my screen here. There we go. Yeah, go Janet. Yes, yeah, exactly, Janet. He was able to track her down through his contacts. So I think that's a really good point and a really important, you know, one of the important ideas, because if it wasn't for that technology, we couldn't have the plot. So that definitely forwards the plot. Yeah, People's University, the pre-19th to 20th century version of a cell phone. But yeah, he was able to use his contacts in that navigation and transportation industry to get those messages. She wouldn't have been able to do that via letters. So that was great. Transportation, I see Tom is talking about the transportation technology. Yeah, so do you, I feel like, you know, I want to say, do you want to talk more about that, Tom? But you're talking about air travel as well as on the water. We saw both of those advance in the book. Fermina and her husband are the first to go in that balloon ride, and that was a big deal. So those are some advances that are true in the book. What ways do they contribute? As Janet said, the telegraph moves the plot forward. Tom's commenting on the advances in the navigation, which also allow some movement of characters. And actually that riverboat trip kind of frames the book, Florentino's riverboat trips. He's only been on the river twice. Miles to cars, to airplanes, to rockets. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So some of the ones that I had also thought were the typewriter as well, and the telephone. And I kind of laughed because Fermina didn't like the telephone. But the typewriter was an okay way to write letters, became an okay way to write personal letters. But we even saw the wooing and the courting and the way you're supposed to do that change from when when Florentino and Fermina are young to when they are old. I don't even want to say the beginning or the end of the book. But, some of the technologies cause bad stuff, like the deforestation along the river and stuff like this. And so that port that is full of floating corpses, and even in the river, there are floating corpses, and cholera is always in the backdrop, So, all of these technologies sort of impact the feeling that you have in the book of this place that's like old, but trying to be new and that sort of thing. So that would be setting. So for characters, we have our three here, our three main people here, our three main characters. So Florentino is very romantic. He is the embodiment of romantic. He's idealistic. And the thing about he's an anachronism. He is stuck in time. As a matter of fact, he tries to sort of defy time in a certain kind of way. And because he's so focused on Fermina, he's kind of able to do that. I'm really interested to know, and this should be easy to answer, did you like Florentino? Did you not like him? How did you feel about Florentino? I'm dying to hear what you thought of him. I'll play a little music in the background because if you've read or watched the movie, I know you have an opinion, and I know there's at least a couple people out there that read the book. Did anyone like him? Nobody liked him? Well, I'll tell you the truth. He's somebody that doesn't care about anybody but himself. Yes, indeed. That's so true. A tormented romantic soul, but a hormonal teen at most. Lynn, yes, a hormonal teen at most. What a hyperbolic sex life. 622 lovers. I did the math. I tried to, it took 54 years. 622 lovers. That's a lot of lovers. And I don't think it's possible. Maybe I'm wrong. And maybe I live a different kind of life. Oh, nice, Andrea. I know, because Andrea, here's the thing. As people are saying he's selfish, he is very sweet to his mother. When his mother begins to have dementia, he recreates that room. He lied to all of them. That's interesting. I want to come back to that, People's University. I don't know if he lied. Well, maybe he did. I want to come back to that. That's a neat point. But back to the other point, he made that room, like his mother kept saying, who am I? Because she didn't know who she was. And she thought she was a character in that children's show or puppet show or whatever. So he recreated that room for her. I thought that was sweet. He would plant flowers. He would bury people who were not going to be buried in a very respectful way because they were, whores or whatever they were. And he tried to look out for people that way. I'm sounding lame the more I talk, given everything else he did. But yeah, I figured he'd be like, it'd be nice to go out to dinner with him one night and feel really special. But then he'd get on my nerves really bad quickly. Glad you're not a lawyer. He lied to all of them. That's interesting. When you say he lied to all of them, what do you mean? Because most of them seem to be in a sort of situation with them where they were just happy enough to have somebody sort of come in for the weekly whatever or the whatever. He told them he was a virgin. He told Fermina he was a virgin at the end. As a matter of fact, when we get to humor, hilarious, Tom. I'd forgotten about that, about Wilt Chamberlain sleeping with 20,000. When we get to humor and Fermina, and he says, I have remained a virgin for you. That is just you just burst out laughing. Is he really serious? I wonder. He told them I don't think he told them, when he says them, he was a virgin. But he definitely, Americana, the last young woman who killed herself, well, actually a girl. I was a little rapey, that particular part of it. And we're going to get to that as well. So anyway, we should probably, move on. But there's Fermina, she's kind of the tie that binds these two together. It's not your traditional love triangle to me. I guess it is, but it's over so long a period of time that I'm not sure that is entirely everything that the book is supposed to be about. And when you think about how Dr. Urbino really does sort of act as a foil for Florentino in that he sort of seems to be more modern. I see that, Tom. He seems to be a more modern man. He uses science to solve problems. He's very rational, but he is a typical, and I am sorry to say this because I don't want to gender type, but he's kind of like what you would expect a man to be of the time. And both Florentino and Juvenal Urbino, I think, they're men of their time and to some respect, for what they expect of women in their lives and of marriage and things like this. But I will move forward because time is going quickly. So these are important minor characters. I think Leona Cassiani and Florentino have a pretty good relationship. I mean, even when he is not entirely honest, perhaps, I think he's as close to her as almost anybody. But I thought it was very funny the way the uncle, his dad and the uncle were named after popes. And Lothario Thuggett's name sounds like what he is. He is a bit of a Lothario. So, and these are important women to Fermina, her aunt who served as a sort of a mother figure early on as the romance between Florentino and Fermino as a young girl. Then she gets sent away when they get caught, though. So that's very difficult. And then Hildebranda is her cousin, Fermina's cousin and confidant. She's having an affair with a married man, but ends up just having to marry some guy who does love her, but she's got these kids, and, she's fat. She says, you don't even recognize me anymore, type thing. So, and then I think Jeremiah de Saint Amour is a very important character. Even though he's so minor. When I started reading the book, I don't know about y'all, anybody who did read it, but I kind of knew what it was supposed to be about. And I thought this was one of the ones. And I was like, who is this? I didn't even understand. Why does the book start with the death of Urbino's best buddy, one of his best buds? And then it really struck me. Does anybody have an idea about why that book begins with the death? It's a suicide of a friend. And there's a lot that's revealed as a result of that suicide. Does anybody remember that piece or know that piece at the beginning? Make sure I don't see anybody. I know it's hard to interact. I guess I'll just say the answer, and I apologize if somebody's typing and I'm jumping in. Bueller. got you, Tom. And I thought that was a great point, because, the book, there's so much, like the cosmos that was in that small short video. I feel like the whole world is in this book. I really do. I love this book so much. And so I think that first scene is very important because it highlights death. It highlights aging. The guy kills himself because he doesn't want to age. He's going to kill himself at the age of 60 so he won't become old. And then to boot, we find out he's got this secret lover, a clandestine lover that he's had all this time, who's, living over here. And what Urbino has to do is kind of let her know what's going on and take care, let her know she's been taken care of, type thing. So, that just kind of sets the scene for what this whole book is about. It's about a lot to do about love and death, and what relationship is there is love and death, and aging, and sex. I mean, that's what this book is about. So who wouldn't like it? But it's really very well done. These are the two children I put down there. They're not really important characters in the book, except to get in trouble at the end because the daughter's such a pill. And then, my tongue in cheek, some of the 622. And again, I can't, we'll talk about some of these, but this is the person who apparently just pulled him into a room and took advantage of him, and he lost his virginity because he was attacked by this woman. He doesn't even know who she is. The widow Nazareth, and if you'll pardon my language, that's the one who thanks him for making her a whore. Essencia Santander, I don't remember her too well, but Sarah Noriega, she's the one with the fetish with the pacifiers. This young woman gets killed, Olympia, because her husband sees that note that Florentino had put on her belly with some paint, because they had met in a work shed or whatever. The widow of two is the closest one that came to marrying him. And, in 286, 287, I'm not sure which copy of the book and what pages you all may or may not have, but the Prudentia Petra, the widow of two, although she never hinted at it, she would have sold her soul to the devil to marry him, talking about Florentino. She knew that it would not be easy to submit to his miserliness, or the foolishness of his premature appearance of age, or his maniacal sense of order, or his eagerness to ask for everything and give nothing in return at all. But despite all this, no man was better company, because no other man in the world was so in need of love. So I'm not going to continue on, but so even though I saw the person say he lied to them, some of those women are pretty wise. This omniscient narrator kind of lets us into the head of some of these women and their thoughts. So she knows his deal, But this poor young woman kills herself. And I say young woman, in the book, she's a girl. She's a 14-year-old girl. And that, when you say that Florentino's not a nice person, he basically is like, he goes in the bathroom and cries, and that's about it. And we know that later on in life, every now and again, he thinks about it and feels bad. But that is pretty bad, I guess. So I don't know. But I don't know. I kind of wanted to like Florentino. I kept looking for reasons to say he wasn't selfish. Anyway, the plot. Now, in a story, a plot's just what happens. It's just, we would say, okay, what's the conflict? What's the problem? What needs to be solved? Who's the main character? And what's the problem? What's the plot? This story is hard to say. It's more than, because my friend Sean, that I went to Wheeling Catholic Central High School with, I love that question, Lynn. I will come back to that. And Tom, I was also saddened by that. That just seemed really very pitiful, that scene with Americana, that girl who killed herself when Florentino left her without telling her, anything, what happened. But what is the story about? Sean had said to some old guy just keeps stalking this woman he wanted to marry and waits for the other old guy to die so he can marry her, that's why we study literature, because even though that kind of is what the story is about, it's so much more than that. it's through that situation that we get to think a lot about these real interesting things to think about life, like love and marriage and that sort of thing. I will say this, it's not a typical structure. And this book is brilliant because I just love it. This is a typical plot structure that you are seeing on the screen. Most stories have some kind of beginning where you're introduced to the main characters and you know what the problem is. And then the rising action, we're trying to figure out the problem and we're going to solve the problem. You know, let's say Rocky is not a man anymore and he's got to fight. I used to always use Rocky in class. He's got to fight Clubber Lang to get his manhood back. So, you know, so at the beginning, we know Clubber Lang's mean. We know Rocky's got issues and Mickey dies and he's got to fight. He's got to fight. And then the rising action, he gets trained and all that. And then the climax, he is in the fight. And then as we're watching the fight, you know, and it's the falling and etc. So not to bore you to death. But in this book, you can't do that. You know, you can't do that. Where does the book begin? It begins with the death of two people, you know, the suicide. And then not long after, Urbino falls off that ladder trying to catch that crazy parrot. But is that the beginning of the story? Because what's the story about? Who's the main character? Is the main character Florentino and the stories about him trying to get Fermina? I think most people would say that's a plausible thing to say. But what about Fermina? You know, previously Lynn had asked a question, do we really get a true interior, get to, you know, explore that? We kind of don't, I don't think, in the book. But so it's not a typical plot structure. It has this disjointed time sequence, which I think highlights, again, that Florentino idealistic, romantic, the eternal love, you know. So, you know, it's out of time. It also kind of highlights Florentino's, you know, his out of time. He just looks like an old man before he's old, and he wears all those weird things, the collar and the hat and the umbrella that he always carries and that sort of thing. So this disjointed time sequence, to me, keeps the reader a bit off balance, and you have to kind of reframe what you thought, because at first I wanted to think, okay, here's what I wanted to think. I don't know about y'all, and I don't know how you approach a book, but I thought, you know, I'm going to be rooting for Florentino to get Fermina because she's going to be stuck in this loveless marriage with this mean guy. Because I thought the dad, you know, when I saw the previews on the movie, I thought that was Urbino. And that's not what it's about at all. And as a matter of fact, Florentino wants to dislike Urbino and ends up kind of begrudgingly liking him, you know, because he's a nice guy. You know, he's done good work. So it's not that. And so you have to keep, you know, as little pieces of information continue to be revealed, you have to kind of readjust your way of thinking. I think that's one thing. I was wondering if the end of Florentino was going to be arrested. For what? Tom, that's a good question. You know, for what? Was he afraid he was going to get caught out from the suicide, you mean? Or, I mean, they were illegally on the ship pretending it had cholera when it didn't, so they could just go up and down the river. I mean, it's a perfect ending. The romantic Florentino, the idealistic, he is now with his love and he will forever be in this place with his love. Now, in reality, we know that's just, I mean, that can't happen. They can only go up and down the river, but so much. They have to pick up supply. I mean, it's not realistic, just like Florentino. But Tom, arrested for what if you get a chance? So I'm going to move forward a bit here and talk a little bit about magical realism then. And again, this magical realism is a combination of realistic and fantastic elements. There may be dreamlike sequences, abrupt chronological shifts. I can give you this fancy word, prolepsis, which just means flash forward. See, there's some flash forward in the book, like you'll find out something that happens later, earlier in the book, as well as regular flashbacks. And I think I picked page 125 as just a brief example of that. I don't know if you noticed, but I think in every chapter, you're in more than one time. Like no one chapter stays in one time period. every chapter jumps around in time. And I don't know if you noticed that, but that's pretty amazing. And yet you don't feel like you don't know the story or that it didn't come at you in the right order. So I find that fascinating. It's about that doll. She gets that doll, Fermina does, when all the women and different people are jealous because she's being courted by the handsome doctor. And it's describing, the passage describes the doll on page 125. So Fermina, so let me see. She gets the doll. And so it's like, this is an example of magical realism, the doll anyway, right? This weird doll seems to grow. Like she can't sleep well and the doll seems to grow. She awoke from an exhausting dream that the doll was growing. The original exquisite dress she had arrived in was up to her thighs and her shoes had burst from the pressure of her feet. Fermina Daza had heard of African spells, but none as frightening as this. On the other hand, she could not imagine that a man like Juvenal Urbino would be capable of such an atrocity. She was right. The doll had been brought not by his coachman, but by an itinerant shrimpmonger whom no one knew. This is also an example of magical realism. But I want to get to near the end of this paragraph because the mystery was never clarified. And just thinking about it made her shudder with fear long after she was married and had children and thought of herself as Destiny's darling, the happiest woman in the world. So the end of that paragraph, she's like thinking forward to that. So she's not thinking forward, but the narrator's taking us forward and kind of lets us know that later on she's happily married and thinking of herself as the happiest woman. And we're finding this out on 125 when she's like a miserable young girl and doesn't quite know what yet. She's just rejected Florentino and trying to decide whether to. It's very interesting. It really provides such a unique flavor to the work, this element of magical realism that is weaved throughout here. So what examples of magical realism are there in the book and what purpose do they serve? And I did give away the doll. I don't know if y'all remembered that doll. That was such a small thing, but yet it is an example. See if what I got here in the comments. Exactly, People's University. All answers are contained in Rocky and The Godfather and Star Trek. Yeah, Tom. Yeah, I mean, he'll get in trouble for that, I'm sure. I don't know whether he'll be arrested, but maybe. But he's an old man, so. So other examples of magical realism when you think about the book? Can you think of any other examples? Magical realism? Well, Fermina did fulfill her father's wish, but to become a great lady. But the interesting thing was she kind of was a great lady, like before she married into a certain class, because she had a certain kind of spirit that allowed her to be independent. And so she did do the conventional thing. She chose Urbino. She didn't love him and he didn't love her when they got married. They said that, but they said there was a good chance they could fall in love, and they did love each other by the end for sure. His last words, God only knows how much I loved you. Oh my God, you want to cry from the very beginning. Anyway, magical realism, you say? So I'll just move the next slide over then and say, I don't know if y'all remember the shipwreck of San Juan, but there was that whole thing where Florentino, we got the kid to dive. The kid took advantage of him, but he got the kid to dive for the jewels because he wanted Fermina to be in a shower of gold and to bathe in jewels and gold. That Rosalba scene is a hoot and not real. I mean, if somebody in the audience wants to, talk about that, we certainly can. I felt like the animals, I don't know if you all remember, but Fermina, loved animals and dogs and whatnot, but all those animals, that was on pages 21 to 22. I found that rather hard to believe. I'll just start on 22. There were all kinds of Guatemalan birds in cages along the passageway and promontory curlews and swamp herons with long yellow legs, and a young stag who came in through the windows to eat the anthurium in the flower pots, and it goes on. It's just so many animals walking around the house. And then, of course, the mastiff gets rabies and kills all the animals. That's crazy. I mean, that's one of those elements of like that. I don't think that could happen. That kind of leads to also, there's a lot of humor in the book. I was wondering, I'll check messages and see if anybody's throwing in some, oh yeah, Lynn, magnolias. Yeah, those magnolias, almond tree. Well, he eats the, part of his love sickness. He's eating, petals from the tree so he can, gardenia, I think is what he associates with her. He was eating gardenias, I think, but definitely the whole courtyard itself where he's playing the violin, I think is very, oh, that's so funny, People's University. The idea that Firmino would go for that nut after all those years was magical. Realism. Well, that's an example of humor. So let's segue right into the next slide, please. No, but I respect that point of view. It's not totally humorous. I mean, that's a funny way to put it, but I do would love to talk about. You're right. It is hard to believe, perhaps, that she would. She seemed attracted to him from the very get-go, and she was in love with him. One of my questions here, and I see it's 7:16. I'm going to probably go till about 7:30-ish. And then turn it over to 7:30-ish, and then turn it over to KV. But I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about that. But here are some of the examples of that I thought were funny. I don't know if you remember the scene when Uncle Leo finally gives Florentino the position of president. He happened to have been with a woman, one of his little birds, in the offices, and in mid-coitus, he gets the position. That was pretty funny. I thought Sarah Noriega was funny with the cat scratching and her pacifier fetish. I just thought 622 Lovers Period was kind of funny, and that you'd keep a book of it. That's kind of macho. I thought Our Lady of Everybody was a really funny, and I don't have that, but Our Lady of Everybody, she was the prostitute who was so good at what she did that after one of the important officials, came in and had a half an hour with her, he gave her a pension for the rest of her life. And I don't remember the exact details, but I thought that was a real hoot. And then the parrot itself, even though he ends up causing the demise of Urbino, he's a hoot. First of all, the way he gets there after that huge fiasco with all those animals, he puts his foot down and tells Firmina, his wife, nothing that does not speak will not come into this house. And so she finds this parrot that can speak. And so, yeah, there's an animal in the house, and he ends up loving that parrot, but it ends up dying because of that parrot. And then I had put that, I have remained a virgin for you. I just busted out laughing. I just thought that was supposed to be very funny. Does anyone else have, she did love him. Did anybody else have things they thought were funny in the book they'd like to slip in the chat there? I think just if you do, I'll be happy to read those out, and I'll keep checking over for the chat. But let's move on to themes. I kept saying to myself, love, time, cholera. I mean, what is the book about? But really, those three words kind of capture a lot of it, because in it, love is something that causes a lot of suffering in this book. There's not a lot of, love is a disease, it's a sickness. And that's another funny part when Transito told Florentino, you got to suffer now and really embrace this, because you will not be able to suffer like this. But here he is on page 61 to 62 at the bottom. It says, he lost his voice and his appetite and spent the entire night tossing and turning in his bed. But when he began to wait for the answer for his first letter, his anguish was complicated by diarrhea and green vomit. He became disoriented and suffered from sudden fainting spells. And his mother was terrified because his condition did not resemble the turmoil of love so much as the devastation of cholera. Florentina Ariza's godfather, an old homeopathic practitioner who had been Transito Ariza's confidant ever since her days as a secret mistress, was also alarmed at first by the patient's condition because he had the weak pulse, the hoarse breathing, and the pale perspiration of a dying man. But his examination revealed that he had no fever, no pain anywhere, and that his only concrete feeling was an urgent desire to die. And all that was needed was shrewd questioning, first of the patient and then of his mother, to conclude once again that the symptoms of love were the same of those of cholera. So, I mean, so if you look in the book, you think about the love that the people have in the book, there's a lot of suffering that goes with it. Florentino suffers, certainly, but other people, it's a lot like death in the book. And then, marriage, it's part of that book for sure. It's part of the book, the institution of marriage. You have widows who are liberated once the marriage is done. Of course, they're only liberated through they only get liberated through a male lover, unfortunately. But other than that, but marriage is something that constrains, and this is in the book I'm saying, y'all, this is in the book, and brings suffering. I mean, Firmina was miserable for a long time. Urbino's mother was mean, Dona Blanca. She was horrible. And Firmina was trapped there, having to learn an instrument she didn't want to play, having to eat food she didn't like, and having to listen to that kind of crap all the time. And I know that some of us have probably been in situations where when we get married, we don't just marry the person, we marry their family. But in particular, in this structure, in this, way that society is structured, women don't have much power. So I guess in those situations, some women would bully others. And so it was just not good. So marriage, just not a good thing in the book. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not in the book. Death and life are intricately intertwined in this book. I find that. And really, when you think about death, it's such a common trope in literature. Death is often a metaphor for climaxing in the sex act. It's dying, and so it's just all like swirled together in this book. And then, as Lynn had mentioned before, there's some machismo going on here in this book, and I don't, I'm not going to get into a big criticism of that. But it is a sort of a male perspective. So what are we to conclude about these things? I am going to put it out there to you all. I'm going to leave those question slides up and see if anybody has anything else they kind of want to add or ask or talk about that I didn't talk about. There's so much more to talk about. We can't just say there's one theme or anything like that. And we could talk all day about the plot structure and that sort of thing, but just trying to highlight the way the book was put together and the impact, those elements of magical realism. You might not even notice them because they are crafted so well and they seem so real and natural. And really sometimes not till you read it out loud or go back do you realize that, or this was hilarious, but you were thinking maybe somebody was going to die of cholera, so you don't want to laugh. And so it's really a beautifully rendered, just a beautiful book. I can't imagine how wonderful it is in its own native tongue, because I'm reading a translation. We're reading a translation. Too much love, not enough cholera. That's awesome, Tom. That should be like the 2020. Too much love, not enough cholera. Number 4, yes. Yeah, because there is a lot of illusion. Whoever's saying yes, number 4, yes. Why does she just realize that was all like an illusion? Then why does she get with him at the end? And why does she always think about him? And why does she cry so hard about him that night she cries after her husband dies instead of for her husband or her? I know, Sean. I should say Sean. Say People's University. Sorry, Sean. I would love, because one thing I did notice, there's a lot of illusion. So what, the city is shrouded. It's old, but it's new, and there's illusion. There's a lot of illusion. When Urbino comes back, he realized he was holding the city in an illusion, like his ideal of it was not. And when she rejects him, that terrible scene for him, poor guy, it was an illusion. Page 17, 19, 106. I do wonder, can we ever know each other? I think is something that might be what's going on in this, because page 27 and 339, there are these two passages. This was about like Urbino and Fermina, just kind of like their rituals, like turn out the light, who gets in bed first, that sort of thing. Then she would roll over in bed and turn on the light without the least mercy for herself, content with her first victory of the day. Like acts like she's pissed because he woke her up. And really, she was already up, but she was just waiting so she could do that. Oh my God, do we get into those kind of awful routines sometimes in a marriage or in a relationship? I think so. But anyway, the truth was they both played a game, mythical and perverse. But for all that comforting, it was one of the many dangerous pleasures of domestic love. But one of those trivial games almost ended the first 30 years of her life together, because one day there was no soap in the bathroom. So it's funny too. And then I thought, can we really ever know each other? When Florentino is first with Fermina, and he's like, you know what? I never thought about it. I wonder if she was even faithful to her husband. What if she had other lovers? He had never even thought about her interior, again, to Lynn's point, what might be going on in her life and how she might be more complex and have more going on than just the trappings of what people see, because it's an illusion. More than once it said, how could a marriage that looks this great be anything but happy? And yet we know, after we read the book, there was a lot of not happy time in that marriage. And just the last one on 339, because it was just moving. And that's the scene I'd said, where Florentino Arezzo, for his part, suddenly asked himself, what would he never have dared to ask himself before? What kind of secret life has she led outside her marriage? Nothing would have surprised him, because he knew that women are just like men in their secret adventures, the same stratagems, the same sudden inspirations, the same betrayals without remorse. Is that true? I don't know. But I do think, I don't know that we can ever really know each other, and that might be a little bit of what's going on with it. Love is meant to be forever. We hope for that. It is at best until death, so it should be ageless. It can't be, and that's the nicest thing I say about Florentino. He stayed with it. That is really eloquent, Sean. I like that a lot. I don't know if y'all saw his comment. Love is meant to be forever. It's certainly in the romantic ideal, it is meant to be forever, that romantic kind of love. And so it can be. And so, yeah, he did love her forever, and he stuck with it. So that is something to be said. Now, how to account for 622 lovers, I could compartmentalize that in my head, not in my own life, but in my head. Without river transportation, there is no love. Tom, you are on it tonight, man. That is awesome. There would be no love without that river transportation. That is for sure. I could talk so much about the different social classes and how Florentino navigated, but it is 7:30 and you all have been so wonderful. And I really appreciate you listening. And what I'm going to do is turn this over, and Sean will help me do so, to KV White, because I think you are just going to just love what KV has to share with you today about Venezuela, the language, some of the geography, and some of the literature. So she's really going to supplement this book talk with some great stuff. I hope you can hang out with us for 30 more minutes. I'd love to hear from KV.
Hi, good afternoon, or maybe I should say buenas tardes, buenas noches, ¿cómo están? It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm so excited to share with you a few minutes to introduce to you my country, Venezuela, and some of the culture. I thought it was a good match because I don't know if you know this, but actually Gabriel Garcia Marquez received a prize that's called the Romulo Gallegos Literature Prize. And Romulo Gallego is actually a Venezuelan writer that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen with you. Okay. So I'm going to give you a quick tour, Venezuela in 15 minutes. Obviously, I won't be able to show you everything, but I'm going to give you a little taste of what my country is like. I wanted to first start with a geographical overview of my country. This is Venezuela, and as you can see, is next to Colombia. We get a little bit of the Caribbean Sea, which is really nice. It makes for really nice weather. And as you can see, I like really this map a lot because it already shows you that we have different regions. The Andes is the mountains, the Llanos is the plains. So it's a really nice way to get a quick introduction. And really, when you look at Venezuela, you see that we have a little bit of everything. We have snow in the mountains. We have a little bit of the Amazon jungle. We have the highest waterfalls in the world, the Angel Falls. We have deserts. And like I said before, we have the coast, which makes for really nice Christmas breaks. And we have all these different regions, and every region has its own dialects and foods, and sometimes even very unique traditions. But there is one thing that brings us all together as Venezuelans, and that is coffee. We love our coffee, and we love it so much that we actually have a whole system for ordering it in a coffee shop. So if you ever go to Venezuela, you cannot just go into a coffee shop and say, hey, dame un café. You don't know what you're going to get. So you have to learn how to order your coffee. So if you like a really strong coffee, you order a cerrero. If you like a little bit of milk, maybe you like a marrón oscuro. If you like a lot of milk, if you see at the bottom, that's a tetero. That's a lot of milk and maybe a drop of coffee. But I have to warn you, tetero is also the word for baby bottle. So if you order a tetero, you know what you're getting yourself into. But in any case, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you. Oh gosh, I wish I could talk to you about all the regions, but I only have so much time. So I figure I will select Los Llanos, or the plains. A lot of our literature comes from Los Llanos because it's one of the most Venezuelan regions in Venezuela. And I say that because the people have maintained a lot of the traditions, the foods, the music. So it's the heart of Venezuela. And Romulo Gallegos, one of our most important writers, writes a lot of the literature from this area. As you can see from the map, it's kind of in the middle of the country. We have amazing sunsets, and that's where the flora and the fauna actually flourish in my country even today. From Los Llanos, Romulo Gallego writes Doña Barbara, and Doña Barbara is a novel that was published in 1929. Romulo Gallegos actually between 1920s and 30s and even 40s was actually considered a really well-known writer in Latin America. He's actually considered a forerunner of magical realism. And a lot of critics say that Gabriel Garcia Marquez and many other writers owe some of their craft to Gallegos, who laid the foundation for magical realism in Latin America. His writing he tries to capture the beauty of the nature. I'm just going to read a little passage from his work. He wrote, La llanura es bella y terrible a la vez. En ella caben, holgadamente, hermosa vida y muerte atroz. So in English, it will be something along these lines. The plain, or the plains, is both beautiful and terrifying. In the plain, there's ample room for a beautiful life and a brutal death. So just let us think in for a minute. The plains are beautiful, breathtaking, they're like a paradise, but you can die horribly. And the reason for that is because that's where nature really is. And as much as man trying to dominate nature is just impossible, nature is a force to reckon with. And that's something that Romulo Gallegos captures in Doña Barbara. Now, the novel, I'm going to try not to give it too much away because this novel is actually available in English. And the translation, it's not the same as the Spanish version, but it's pretty good, in my opinion. You basically have in this novel a lot of conflicts, and one of the most important ones is that of nature versus man, or man versus nature. But you also get an interesting conflict between tradition and modernity and superstition and progress, and that's presented through the characters. The protagonist is Doña Barbara, and she's just a beautiful woman, and something horrible happens to her, and she becomes this monster, really, that tries to dominate everything and everyone. She's believed to be a witch who has a partner, and she consults the partner, and most people think the partner is really the devil, and everyone attributes magical powers to her, and everybody's really afraid of her. Santos Luzardo is this young man who was born in Los Llanos, but he grows up in the city. He has a modern education. He's actually a lawyer by trade, and he returns to the plains because he has inherited this land and he wants to sell it and get rid of it. But then he's just taken, he's just taken with the beauty of the land. You can see the clashes between Doña Barbara, who stands for the superstitions and the traditions and all of that, and then Santos Luzardo, who really wants to bring progress and machinery and money, and we can change Los Llanos. And so it's this back and forth. And then Marisela is Barbara's daughter, and she stands for this glimmer of hope for the future and the innocence and the promise of what's to come. So it is an interesting dynamics between these characters. They really represent these conflicts very well in the story. And I don't want to say too much just in case you want to read it. The other thing I wanted to share with you is the use of language in the novel, because I wanted to give you a taste of what the novel will sound like. There's certain sayings that appear over and over in the novel, and they are representative of how people talk in Los Llanos. The first one is "wa," and I cannot translate it because it doesn't have a literal translation. It's an interjection. Like, I'm talking to you and I say something like, "Wa, you mean it? No way," right? But it could be used in that way, but it's just, I couldn't tell you a word in English that means the same. Maybe wow is the closest, but it doesn't quite get to that. Coroto. That one was kind of fun because I haven't really heard that word in a while, and it just means anything. It's a placeholder. So I remember my mom saying, "Pásame ese coroto, give me that coroto." Which coroto? Well, that one, that coroto, right? That thing. So it's a placeholder, and honestly, we all say it, we all use it. Dañera is more specific to Los Llanos or the plains, and it means a person who practices witchcraft. But not only that, it's someone who does things that are evil. You have to be evil to be a dañera. Palito is a fun one. It means alcohol. So the correct expression is echarse un palito, or dame un palito, give me un palito, right? Like, give me a drink. And it's usually used in a playful manner, right? In a social situation when you're going to drink to have fun. Quien quita cannot be translated literally because literally it means who takes away. But that's not what it means. It means why not? It could happen. What do you know? Quien quita, right? So these are all kinds of fun sayings that you can find in the novel that are really representative of how Venezuelans talk. I also wanted to share with you an interesting tradition from Los Llanos, and I had to tell you this. I'm going to tell you about it, but I can't do it. This is this is really hard to do because contrapunteo is a verbal challenge. And the way it works is that two or more people challenge each other to a battle of improvised stanzas. They have to rhyme. And again, they're improvised. And what is interesting is that they're intertwined. So you have to take some of what your partner or your the other person is saying and bring that into your stanza. So it takes a lot of skill and talent that I don't have. It is determined by skill, meaning that, the longer you can go on, the longer the contrapunteo will go. If you have copleros or performance who are very good, the contrapunteo can go on for a very long time. Now, most contrapunteos are improvised, but some of them are part of the literature, part of the canon. And one of them is Florentino y el Diablo, or Florentino and the Devil. No relation to Marquez's Florentino. But this Florentino is a plainsman who is known for being really good coplero, someone who does contrapunteo really well. And he's going home at night, and suddenly he's challenged to a contrapunteo by this stranger who turns out to be the devil. So they go back and forth through the night, and Florentino is basically trying to win this challenge, because if he loses, he will lose his soul. Now, I brought this in because trying to look at a contrapunteo is difficult, since they are improvised. There's not a lot of written records, but this one has one. And the reason why I wanted to share with you is because you can see how it works. Now, I know this is in Spanish and some of you might not be able to read it, but what I want you to notice is that the last line of the stanza before is used as the first line in the next stanza, and so on. So part of the challenge is that one has to incorporate what the previous singer has said and incorporate it into your own stanza, and then provide one for the next person to pick it up. So there's some sort of collaboration as well in the challenge. For Florentino y el Diablo, this actually was written in 1940, and it was really popular in Venezuela, and is still, performed nowadays. And as you can imagine, because it's Florentino y el Diablo, or the devil, it's good versus evil. If you're wondering, Florentino does win the contrapunteo, and he's able to keep his soul. But that's because he asked for help. His last few stanzas are basically asking the saints and God and the Virgin Mary to come help him. So he's able to save his soul at the end. I wanted to close this just by encouraging you to look at some works by Gallegos. Again, he's a gifted writer. His descriptions of the regions that he's writing about are just so beautiful. He writes about the Llanos, but he writes about other regions, and he was known to go into the region and do exhaustive research before writing his works. And he's a writer that unfortunately has been forgotten in the last few decades, but it's really worthy of some attention, I think. Thank you so much for your time.
KB, I thought that was so interesting. I really appreciate that. I saw a couple of my friends that I see online were trying to figure out what kind of coffee, where they'd fit on your coffee spectrum.
Oh, I couldn't see the comments. I would have left it up a little longer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just love hearing you speak the Spanish and read some of those passages, because, I know that some must be lost in translation. And I very much enjoy learning about a new writer. I don't know about this writer, so it's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sean? Oh, nice, Dave. You're muted, Sean, I think.
Sorry. Yeah, I just said, thanks, Dave. There's a nice comment from Dave Wren. And people love coffee. Look, coffee. Yeah. I think I said, at some point I said, yay, coffee. So there you go.
Well, love and coffee. I mean, what else is there other than water?
Whoever likes the guayoyo, I'm seeing that they're now, that's like a watered down coffee.
What is?
The guayoyo is if you like your coffee watered down, that's what you will ask for. Like if it's not too strong, it's more water than coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Are you sure you like that, Janet? Or you the one who said you?
Yeah. Thank you both very much for that. Are there any other questions before we sign off for the evening? I may have one more. Oh, there's Dave Wren again. Okay. Wait, Janet said something.
Janet took her order back. I wondered about that.
Thank you from
I would like to acknowledge that Mr. Volpe is the greatest of all time. I would never, in my wildest imagination, hope to compete with such an icon, but to come in second to Volpe and Janet's book, that's high praise. And so I thank you for that.
Well, you're second in my book too.
Oh, I'm just a big bunch of number 2 for everybody.
You may overtake Volpe at some point, but right now.
Don't say that. No need to say that.
I did have a question about the book that I didn't get to ask. Is that okay?
Is this with me?
Right. The whole, the cholera thing, the plague thing. It's a metaphor, right? I mean, you talked about love being suffering and all that. So it's not the only novel we read this summer. Hopefully we all read the novels that had plague as part of the plot.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think Marquez was saying with that?
Well, I first think it again is has to do with that end of one century, beginning of another, and the uncertainty and the fear of what the future is going to bring. Instead of being excited about the new technologies, being worried about, and also looking at what are some of the side effects, unintended consequences of the technology. So maybe that it was a way to develop the character of Urbino Uvenal to improve the city.
Yeah.
Because it was the sewer system that he improved, and that technology improved that, and that sort of thing. But other than that, I'm not sure. And I think that's an excellent question. There's probably definitely more to it than that. Any other ideas? Yeah.
That's my question. Glad you asked.
But KV, did you want to say anything? I didn't know if you were going to say something there.
No, I wasn't going to say anything, but I do remember you mentioned the fin de siècle as being influential in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, that repeats at the end of basically every century in literature. So I think you're absolutely right that you see in those books a lot of emphasis of everything and anything that could go wrong. And technology is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you read Dracula, that's a big fin de siècle book. And
Yeah.
it's all about how things do go wrong and the fear of technology and change and all of that.
Indeed.
And yeah, so we have to tie it to the present, right? And
Yeah.
then
Well,
that was something of the past, but it's still here. So comment on that, maybe. Go ahead, get political. Go ahead, Kim.
I wasn't going to get political. I was going to say that I thought we could, originally I was like, it's a parable for our time. Then I was like, is it? Why did I say that? Because I was thinking about the setting and about how cholera was something that was sort of, it could not be contained. It was not being controlled. And it was something that was scaring people. And I mean, that can produce a particular anxiety, a particular mindset and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I think it's a great question. I'm happy if anybody wants to chime in with their thoughts. Do you have thoughts on that, Sean? What were your thoughts?
No, I have no thoughts on it. I'm asking the experts. So anyway, thank you very much for the presentation. And I'll just remind people that Tuesday we have a program, Lunch with Books, at noon. Jan Kroon will talk about a gentleman who, during the American Civil War, he was actually in the South. He was injured and was bedridden, and he saw, the book is called The War Through My Window. It's a diary. So that's Tuesday at noon. And then, as I said, next week we'll have the Geography Bee. I'd also like to announce that our next People's University, this series, the 30th one we've done, corresponds with the passage of the 19th Amendment, that gave women the right to vote here in the United States. And it is called The Struggle for Women's Rights. And I think we have a really good faculty for that. Almost as good as the one we had for this series. So thank you all again, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.